Hey there, my fellow lunatics, and welcome to Dakon's Madhouse.
Hey there, my fellow lunatics. Today we're doing kind of a gimmicky build, but at the same time a pretty decent build in the end. This is the Hydra build. Now everything here is going to be leveled up to level 19, and unless I say otherwise, everything drops off of at least one of the Hydra bosses. First, we have got the Hydra Bone Helm, and this gives us a chance to stun our targets on melee hit, as well as a boost to our critical hit chance. Next is the Hydra Bone Breastplate, which also gives us a chance to stun, as well as a boost to our melee damage. Our third piece of armor is the Hydra Bone Shins, which again gives us a chance to stun and increases our melee and ranged attack speed. Once you have the 2-piece set bonus, you have a 20% chance on melee hit to increase your ranged damage by 30%. For the lantern, I have gone with the Orb Lantern to give me a 19% boost to your mining damage. Now, the Orb Lantern is crafted at the Scarlet Workbench, but this thing isn't required. If you want to go with something completely different, like the Pearl Lantern, go for it. For our necklace slot, I have gone with Hydra's necklace, and this gives us some burning damage, as well as a 17% boost to our damage against burning targets. For my rings, I've gone with Hydra's ring in both slots, and this gives me a chance to increase my critical hit damage, a chance to apply poison on hit, as well as an increase to my damage against poison targets. Now, one thing you could do is you can use one of Hydra's rings, which gives you an increase to your critical hit damage, a 10% reduced impact of slowed, and a 17% chance to apply slippery on hit. I really don't think that this is worth it. I think personally go with 2 Hydra's rings. A slippery just isn't all that interesting. However, if you want to, use one of each. Once you've got the 2-piece set bonus for the rings and necklaces, you're going to get a 20% chance on ranged hit to increase your melee damage by 30%. In our bag slot, I've got Morpha's Bubble Bag, and I got this for the increase to my movement speed as well as the increase to my mining damage. Morpha's Bubble Bag drops off of the slime boss Morpha in the Sunken Sea. For my offhand, I went with the Hydra's Tooth. This gives a 5% chance to deal triple damage, as well as a 29% boost to your ranged damage. Alternatively, from the Hydra's Tooth, you could use the Hydra Bone Shield. This gives you a boost to your health and armor, as well as heals you 6.8 health every second while you're below your maximum health. For our weaponry, I went with the Ricochet Shuriken. This gives me a bonus to my ranged attack speed, as well as a bonus to my critical hit damage. Now, why did I pick the Ricochet Shuriken? Well, it is the only physical ranged weapon that drops off of a Hydra boss. So that's why I chose this one. Truthfully, use any ranged weapon you want. I've also gone with the Hydra Bone Sword for my melee weapon, which gives me a 20% boost to damage against bosses, as well as a 57% boost to damage against stunned targets. Now, bosses are immune to stun, but regular enemies are not. I also went ahead and grabbed a Tome of Sprouts, just so that I can summon one little Sproutling, and it has a chance to apply poison, which synergizes well with Hydra's ring. What we end up with is a build that focuses on both ranged and melee at the same time. This will give you a boost to your range damage as well as a boost to your melee damage, so you're going to want to be shifting back and forth between ranged and melee based on what makes sense for your specific target, or whether you just feel like going back and forth. Really, all you need to do is get 2 hits off with your sword, and then you can switch to ranged for 3 or 4 hits, and then you go back to your sword for a couple of hits. This back and forth is really what this build thrives on, although personally, while I was doing testing, I found that the sword did a lot more damage than the ranged weapon and was overall more valuable, and I spent more time with my sword than I did with my ranged. And having the Hydra Tooth equipped actually gave me some good triple trouble boosts that allowed me to do a whole lot of damage. There is one point where I believe I did almost 80k to, I think, the core commander or maybe Nimruza. I can't remember which one, but it can be really effective. But that doesn't mean that the ranged isn't effective either. I also was having a good time with the ranged, as the shuriken is fast and it was critting for around 8 to 12k on average, and it could triple for even higher. So ranged is also still really viable, and it had a much faster attack speed. When looking at skills, there are quite a few actually that I found really helpful. The first one is Miner's Strength, which is down the left-hand side of the mining tree. It provides a 10% of your mining damage is added to your melee damage. This was really helpful, and one of the main reasons I went with Morpha's Bubble Bag as well as the Orb Lantern, because of their boosts to my mining damage. In the melee tree, I actually went and took Taking a Step Back on the far right-hand side, a skill I don't think I've ever used on the melee tree before. This gives me a 20% chance on melee hit to increase my range damage by 30%, just like the bonus on my armor, and it stacks. On the ranged tree, I also did something similar, taking Charging In, which has a 20% chance on ranged hit to increase my melee damage by 30%, just like the bonus that I get from my rings and necklace. And again, this does stack. In the gardening tree, I took Potent Poison all the way down on the bottom right, as this increases my damage against poison targets significantly. On the fishing tree, I actually have Well-Trained Aim, which increases my range damage based on 30% of my fishing. And in the explosives tree, we have got Afterburn, which increases my burn damage by 50%. All of these skills are very helpful and will make this build work a whole lot better. When it comes to pets, I went ahead and used the Embertail, because I have an Embertail that has a really high chance to consume the burning effect and just do lots of extra damage. Since I'm already doing burning, I feel like this is really helpful. However, since you are doing burning already, and it is guaranteed that you're going to do your own burning every time you hit, the cat isn't necessarily the perfect pet for this. You could also just as easily go with the Fan Hair, who provides poison damage, and since your chance to poison isn't guaranteed, just really high when you have 2 rings and the sprout going, but still not guaranteed, so that Fan Hair can increase your chances of getting poison even faster. You could use the Molten Slime because of its, again, burn damage and abilities there, but that's in the same boat as the Embertail. Otherwise, I would recommend using either the Owl Lux or the Pheromoth, as both of those have buffs that work really well for the player. When it comes to food buffs, I have used all of the food buffs that I tend to use for both melee and for ranged. So if you aren't familiar with the types of food buffs that I use, check out my video on food buffs and endgame food combos, as it will give you all of the details for all of the foods that I use for melee, for ranged, for generic, for magic, all those details. Whatever you need to know about food, I've got it in that video. During my testing, I honestly found this build to be a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Since it's Hydra boss themed, everything comes pretty much from a Hydra boss. But if you wanted to make this build even better, you could kind of ignore the overall theme and maybe swap out the necklace or swap out one of the rings for something that just does a big boost to your damage. That would probably increase the overall effectiveness of the build, but that doesn't mean it's not effective as is. I was easily able to take on all 3 of the final endgame bosses, Core Commander, Nimruza, and the Urslime, with this build in hard mode. So if I can do it with this build unedited as it is, even though you can make it better, I don't necessarily think you need to make it better. I've also never before used a build that actually takes advantage of those 2 skills that increase your ranged or your melee on the opposing skill's hit. I've always been a big believer of picking one or the other, as trying to go down both routes is usually an act of futility, as you're gimping both your melee and your ranged. But this build is actually focused around doing just that. So you aren't gimping your ranged out when you boost up your melee and vice versa, as this one boosts both at the same time. Does it boost them both as much as just focusing on one or the other? No, it doesn't, and you can still get better builds if you focus on just melee or just ranged. However, if you did want to go with both and have a more versatile build style, then this works really, really well for you. I honestly was surprised at how good this build was and how overall effective I found this build to be. So if this is something that you want to make, let me know in the comments what kind of changes you might make to it, or changes you did make to it when you put it together yourself. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to, go ahead and buy a membership, because those memberships help a lot. Even just that cheap $2 membership makes a huge difference for me and lets me keep making these videos for you. So thank you guys so much for your time. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay crazy, everybody.